As a reminder to folks, or anyone that's interested, we do have any of our sessions prior to our community review, as well as the ones that we've been doing on the CA baseline community review of patient. Those are all been added to our YouTube playlist. So I always start each of these sessions just by making some of these links available to folks while we get joiners to hop on. This is kind of our YouTube playlist. If there's anyone who's interested in seeing the Excel spreadsheet as we start to enter feedback on the call, I'm going to put that in here as well. This is like a Google Doc, so anyone who has access to the link can take a look. You can see what we've recorded so far, and you can see it in live form as Elliot starts to kind of capture the feedback for the group. Let me.
Sheraton, just as we wait to get started.
Yep.
A quick question. Several weeks ago, we looked at some of the technical corrections and things on the baseline. For instance, the data absent reason technical correction that we had from BC. And
1 second,
we talked about
you cut off the last minute there. So I heard data absent reason, something.
Technical correction that came from that ticket from BC. We talked about doing a package with the technical corrections sometime early in the year. Do you know when that's going to be?
So the let's just make sure. I'm thinking it might have been applied, but let me confirm. So let me go to our Canadian baseline. So this was in reference to the changes that we would have made a month or two ago. I thought I packaged afterwards as 116. So that should be available, Lorraine, with the changes to practitioner general and practitioner role general, as well as I think there were a couple other modifications to extensions that we've been doing in the meantime.
This would have been on practitioner registries.
Well, it was on practitioner registry in context, but because it was a rule that practitioner registry was inheriting from these two things.
Yes. Okay. So, yeah, no, I hadn't heard that the package was generated. So when my team asked, I said I'd ask.
Yeah, so I repackaged as 116. That should be available. Take a look at it. See if that kind of resolves the issues. I anticipate it will, but that's just essentially an update that covered those corrections, as well as there were a handful from the month before that got added in as well. Okay, and for folks that are on the line, basically, if you're used to seeing kind of and like tracking our updates to the resources in the project, when I'm showing the package and I'm linking that out, what that effectively means is like it's a snapshot in time of these are the resources that you can leverage within your own profiling ecosystem. So these don't mean that we've made changes in the last month. It just means that we made the changes previously and we developed a package that someone could then anchor around. So there's no changes to these profiles. It's just a, that we haven't previously kind of worked through. It's just these are now available for your kind of infrastructure. So that's in the chat if folks are interested in 116 in the meantime. Okay. I'm going to go back to this. So we've got a cumulative mass here. I did the kind of update at the beginning. If folks are interested in catching any of the previous sessions that we've reviewed the patient profile in the CA Core Plus project as a CA baseline community, you can find them there. We're officially on session 5. We are at the very end of patient. So I'm hoping that as part of the agenda today, we can start touching on practitioner. If you're just joining us for our kind of process, I've got the submissions slide, or sorry, the ballot feedback Excel that will be submitted at the end of our review. I typically will have it on the upper right-hand corner while we're reviewing the content. While we've got a volunteer, Elliot, who is going to be kind of live scribing the feedback as we present it. My goal is to be a facilitator in terms of, as one of the authors of the content that's being reviewed and bringing it to this community to outline specific things that, merit kind of desiring additional feedback on the modeling and bringing to the attention and, essentially trying to drive the conversation and answer questions that folks might have around the particular profiles. And by having kind of our scribing be separately, it allows us to kind of preserve and separate those roles a little bit better. So We'll jump to that in a second, but before we do, I wanted to just touch on kind of the remainder of the agenda. For folks, when we get to reviewing patient and practitioner that are following along on your own computers, you can access the contents that we're going to review via any one of these links. If you want to provide feedback individually, that first link is going to give you instructions on how to provide and submit your individual kind of Excel spreadsheet as part of the ballot process. What I have down for our main agenda item is topic number 1 should be quick. It's discussing whether or not we want to request an extension to review the remaining profiles. So we've got 3 more in the docket. The second item is we're returning to the decision around emergency contact modeling. So we had a lot, like a whole session around the 2 options that we have for modeling and what type of feedback that we want to provide. We were pretty kind of house divided on the last session. I said, you know, take this back, chew on it. We had some folks go out and dig into this a little bit more, and I'll have some context I can provide when we're framing that decision. But the goal being we decide on at least how we want to submit feedback on the baseline. We don't necessarily always have to outline this is the alternative, but if there is one in place that we want to provide, our goal is to kind of capture that and for Elliot to kind of document it as true and proper feedback to the CA Core Plus profiles. And then hopefully we'll get a chance to start working through practitioner as well. So without further ado, I'm going to the first section, I'm going to just frame this for folks a little bit before jumping into the actual guide. But so our first topic is whether or not, you know, we want to ask for an extension. And when we as a governance stream originally met, we kind of jotted down a schedule that would work within the timeframes of what was being proposed as the ballot period cycle for the CA Core Plus profiles, which was, I think it was like January 15th or 16th to February 15th. So we were originally shooting for 15th and we still have time, but we also have 3 more profiles that are part of the review. So, you know, I think like we're doing the right thing and giving patient the time it needs, and it's an extensive profile to begin with compared to them. But I just want to kind of frame this as it's probably an important, like if we're going to ask for the extension, to ask for it now, so that like that can go in, and the rest of the community that might also be contributing to CA Core Plus feedback knows that they may also have additional time as well. Because if we do put in the request to open up the cycle, it's not just for us as a community that's reviewing it. It would be for specifically anyone who would be providing feedback on the CA Core Plus. So I want to kind of pose this as probably low impacts on the profiling side, because this is such an early iterative release. You know, having more time between when the feedback comes in and when you see an update is not going to make a huge difference, because we know that there are going to be multiple cycles that are coming out this year. But I do want to raise that, you know, some of the feedback that we are capturing is kind of related to, you know, asking for more clarification and separation of concepts in the framework. And so like more on the CIHI side, there is potentially, you know, a little bit of impact in that they might be kind of waiting for any of the feedback that we've been capturing to be received. And I just put an example in there. Elliot, I see that you've raised your hand. You might be on mute.
Yeah,
Yep.
one of the things we said right off the bat was that the schedule that they'd given us was too aggressive, and it wouldn't provide sufficient time to do a review. Merely from that point of view, I think we should ask for an extension to say, if you want this reviewed, you need to give sufficient time.
And so that speaks to kind of the next bullet, which is, you know, we always said that as part of that we want to make sure that we have that avenue for extension. So how much time should we ask? I gave it like a little bit of context into kind of what's outstanding, but you know, what are folks feeling? Lorraine, I see you got your hand up.
Yeah, do we think the end of February is enough? That gives us what? Does it give us 2 weeks or 3 weeks?
Let's see. My calendar isn't coming up on that view. So if we review on Fridays, that would give us 1, 2, 3 sessions if we ended on February 29th. The first is a Friday as well of March. That'd be 4 sessions, 4 more on top of today. Does
I mean,
that,
as a gut feel, it sounded like it's a reasonable extension, but do people think that it's enough?
is anyone feeling like that might not be enough? And we want to ask for more up front?
You know, the thing I hate about doing reviews is you never know you're done until you're done.
Mhm.
It sounds like it should be enough, and you know, it seems to be a reasonable ask. But whether it's enough or not, I don't think we'll know.
Yeah, I'm a bit with you. I think we need to give it our best shot. I mean, we've not done this in a while, and this kind of behavior. So I think set an agenda. And by the way, forgive me if I missed this because I came a little bit late, but are you suggesting that your updates would be predefined at predefined intervals, or based upon, you know, until there's nothing, you know, more in your list, basically? Or is it just going to be as they are made available?
Oh, so you're talking about, so maybe I'll describe what will happen after the ballot, and then you tell me if that answers your question. So
Okay, good.
we submit the feedback from like, this is our community feedback. These are the
Mhm.
things that we're requesting, you know, further clarity, improvements, technical correction, changes in modeling, etc. That goes in to the actual CA Core Plus profiles and gets communicated upwards to CIHI. Well, actually, I'm skipping a step. Technically, we have a disposition period where, because right now, basically InfoA and CIHI are the hosts of the content. We will have essentially a public disposition session where, you know, CA baseline folks and the larger community is welcome to come in, participate, kind of discuss any of the aspects of the feedback that they've submitted. And where we'll say, okay, this is one that, you know, requires further clarification. This is one that is a change that needs to be made. And anything that is identified as, yep, it's an immediate change, it will be made, is going to occur, and you'll see that come out on the CA Core Plus profile simplifier page, and we'll package. So there'll be at this point in time, after the ballot, here's everything that was resolved, the feedback that was collected and dispositioned, and you'll have a 0.1, you know, essentially post-ballot package. At the same time, there are continuous refinements that are continuing to happen, and expansion of content that we will have available to then model in the CA Core Plus. So there's likely going to be another cycle on top of the review and the feedback that we provided, especially for new content come, I think it's going to be like the May cycle. So, you know, this is going to kind of get us to the patient practitioner role in org and allow for any of that feedback that affects the framework to drill upwards. But we anticipate that there's going to be another cycle following this in May that will have additional resources, additional profiles as well.
Okay. All right, good.
Does that
Just
answer your
curious.
question, Ron?
I just needed to know if there was, you know, intervals or how we were determining when the next update would be appropriate to provide, but that sounds reasonable to me. So.
Yeah, the goal is to get all the refinements that are dispositioned in by the end of March. So anything, basically there'll be a CA Core Plus post-ballot package before the end of March.
Okay, good.
And again, like, we're not really expecting people to really use the fire package portion of it,
No,
but because it's so early, but it's just to say, hey, this is, like, we went through this process and this is the kind of outcome of the refinements that were requested.
okay.
So just going back to this, like, should we ask for at least until March 1st? That would give us this session plus 4 more if we could submit up until March 1st. Anyone opposed to asking for that and feel that we need more time?
Would there be any issue with requesting an additional extension? Because I think uh, the more optimistic we can be about the deadlines, to kind of keep us focused, if you will.
So, I mean, this is the first time that we were running this process. I would say, like, we probably wouldn't hear, no, you couldn't have another extension, but I think we should shoot for not doing that, because as a community, we are one member that's doing this. So we're going to go out and we're going to tell people, okay, the ballot period is actually changed. It's now this. It's probably not a great thing for folks to also then hear again, okay, actually the ballot period is now changed again. So if we can get our dates to a point where we think we probably won't have to do that again, I think it's going to be helpful for folks that aren't part of these regular calls and kind of know what's going on.
Fair enough.
So do we think March 1st like gets it to that, or should we ask for like another week for like buffer, another 2 weeks for buffer? What do folks want to do?
Well, it's just good to have more buffer for this, because as we are doing first time, so still learning or going through the process, so maybe a couple of weeks will be better after March 1st. Just my opinion.
So Mukesh, are you saying up to March 1st or
No,
after?
2
March
weeks.
1st?
Yeah, at least 2 more weeks. Just my opinion, but I'm okay with what I think. So maybe March 15th.
March 15th. Are folks comfortable with that?
Would be and we could certainly work more aggressively than that, but if that seems reasonable, I'm happy for anybody to veto me.
The only consideration is, if I don't know, you guys probably can't actually see my calendar. So March 15th, I know we've got some folks from Kai-Hi on the call, and we were looking at the disposition period. So basically, if the period closed 15th to receive submissions, that would mean the 18th to the 20th, I think it's like the 29th maybe, would be dispositioning. And we want to make sure we have like folks who are going to be present. I know there's a couple folks that are kind of away in March. Is there any concerns on that front? We could have a longer dispositioning period if we needed to, but.
Well, I mean, my concern about cutting short the dispositioning period is if the committee coming up with dispositions needs to go back for clarification to the submitter or anything like that,
Yeah,
that's actually be really constraining them. I mean,
Yeah.
one of our options really is to set a date and time box and prioritize what are the most important things, and maybe we don't get to it. Is one of our choices, I think.
And this isn't necessarily our last cut at this content.
Mhm.
no, that's right.
So should we split the difference and like shoot for the 8th, or should we still shoot for the 1st?
Let's pick one. Let's shoot for the 8th.
Okay,
I'm not hearing any strong messages either way, but I think that's.
March 8th. All right, anyone concerned about that before we move on to our next topic? I see thumbs up. All right, now for the fun part. So just to close this up, so I'll submit to InfoWay and Kai-Hi on behalf of the baseline, asking for the request. You'll likely see an update on the InfoCentral forums because we have to obviously let folks know about the extension, and essentially make it an opportunity for everyone involved. So I'm gonna you'll probably see that shortly, but the update may take a little bit just to get out on the forums. On the patient side of things, so we've made our way all the way through what felt like a wall of mappings for patient, which is great. We spent a lot of time last week talking about patient contact relationship versus role. And so I'm just going to summarize kind of, there are two elements from like the data content standard as of, this would be the, November 9th. that were modeled in 0.1 version of what was released in the core. And those are emergency contact relationship and emergency contact relationship type. And the difference really between the two is that the relationship element is much more oriented around essentially kind of descriptor and qualifier of the kind of relationship, where relationship type is a little bit more around function or role, right? So emergencies contact relationship, for example, friend, mother, patient, friend, mother, father, versus your role for this person as a next of kin, a caregiver, an emergency contact. So given that, the challenge that we ran into is that in FHIR, there's one element for describing a relationship. And I see somebody's got their hand up. Let me see. Lorraine, go ahead.
Yeah, it was just a few further clarification. So don't forget, we're talking about the type on the contact element. And in our case, we're talking about how we're using it for emergency contact. So there is no element called emergency contact. We have a slice for emergency contact. I just want to make it clear that we were talking about the attributes on the contact element.
Being used under this specific context, yeah. And I think we
Yes.
might have captured, we'll look in a second here, but I thought we might have captured a little bit about having better separation, and not relying so much on slices for conveying that, because these are concepts that could apply beyond emergency, but we'll check that in a second on the sheet. So within this context of these elements, basically you've got two distinct concepts, but in FHIR, the patient.contact.relationship is really the only one that would convey quotable concepts that potentially could span either one. And so the way it was kind of currently modeled is guiding, essentially implementers to supply both emergency contact relationship and emergency contact relationship type codings as distinct codable concepts that could be sent under the patient contact relationship, right? So what was being proposed is send them as distinct codable concepts, because any given relationship, any given contact can have multiple relationship in attributes about that contact. The alternative that was discussed last week was to model the emergency contact relationship, so friend, mother, father, under patient contact relationship with some essentially value set guidance, because they're not fully reflected in the value set that's there today, and to model the type via some type of extension. I put an example here because there's actually been some subsequent discussion at the working group meeting within the patient administration working group, which handles patient, around this particular topic. So the timing was really good for us to have this discussion and for it to be working group meeting, because it actually was one of the things that came up. So before we talk about like weighing one or the other, I do want to just give the kind of the context that Joni sent through from the working group meeting, and give you guys links to some of the issues that had been previously raised that were discussed that map really well to what we were struggling with. So Monday this week, patient administration met with a specific topic around patient relationship. And the challenge that was being raised was primarily around the value sets. I'm going to put the link to the JIRA in chat. But essentially, the idea was that the value set that was in place for patient contact relationship was primarily functional and role-based, whereas the original requester was wanting to reflect, I think it was a little bit more variation in, I want to say it was a guardian use case. Let me see. I'll pull it up so we can look. So they were asking for a way to address their challenge that they were having with modeling for a particular type of role and whether to put it into the contact relationship or otherwise. Patient administration met, and they were thinking about this from the context of what should be changed in R5 and R6, and determined that it would be preferable, rather than expanding this value set further to expand new kind of relationships, to provide better guidance and to pursue a separation of the concepts and a separation of the value sets that are used for said concepts in the R5 expression for patient. So what they basically said is, in R5, the resolution is going to be to update the binding that's in the relationship element to be changed to V3, which is more oriented around personal relationships. So this would be like father, mother, child, adopted daughter, foster child. And to create a element called role, and I think that's described here. So they would be creating this. It doesn't exist today. And so what that kind of aligns to is the separation modeling that we discussed last week. What's important to note, though, is that these are changes that are being discussed in R5 and R6. So treat them kind of like this is the philosophy and the further clarification that we can get on this, but we can't, as an R4 guide for CA Core Plus, use this distinctly without applying, for instance, a pre-adoption extension. So I wanted to give people that context because it offers us up a way of addressing this without having to uniquely create an extension in Canada for this concept, but rather once it's established as something that gets introduced into R5, which would be here, to use the pre-adoption extension and tell folks if you want to convey information about a patient relationship type, then it will be populated into this extension that's intention is to allow for easier mappings to later versions of FHIR. So there was another discussion item that was around ranking, and it was a feedback item that we put in last week. So Joni also sent me the Jura to this because they made a resolution on that as well that should help us inform, and I think was aligned to what we were asking for. But now you have the details around kind of what's being looked at internationally to solve this particular challenge. So I kind of wanted to bring this back to kind of this decision, which is, actually, I'm going to show this one more time. Whether or not we want to recommend, having the same concepts mapped to the relationship element that we have in R5 with guidance to supply them as separate codable concepts, or to move towards trying to align to what we're seeing in R5 and R6 and what's being put forward as a resolution to this issue from the working group. Are there other things that we have to evaluate before we'd feel good about kind of deciding where we'd align on our recommendation?
Sheridan, do you know if there was anyone from FireEye or FMG at that discussion?
I don't, but I can ask Joni because I actually think she was in it.
Joni definitely was there. I was not there. I was at the working group meeting, but I didn't attend that session.
Okay. Maybe I'll just check the attendance. I think adding a new element to patient is going to see a certain amount of pushback. So it'll be interesting to see whether this actually goes ahead.
Okay, so if I may, Sheridan, very soon, there's a subgroup of the Human Services work group in Health and Human Services group in HL7, and they're of course modeling for social determinants of health and also how to interact with social services, where groups are needed to be defined. But this issue about touching the patient resource is very heavily on their mind, and if they're essentially making the assumption that it's sacrosanct, that it can't be touched, I'm not in favor of that assumption, by the way. I think we should push that envelope a little bit. That I appreciate that it's a stable resource, but we're motoring on here, and the farther we go without addressing things that I think are fundamental to the workings of healthcare, the less able we'll be to do that. The longer we let things get, used, the more difficult it's going to be to make these adaptations. So I just want to caution you. The other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to have a meeting of the stakeholders that I'm dealing with in that regard with this group, and bring in the data modelers for CIHI on that call as well, because this is that team is doing this, you know, they've got a bunch of ideas, and I think it would be really, really good for us to hear those ideas and talk to each other across those two groups, because you know, we're going to be both in the same space and have sort of the very similar reasons for wanting certain things, and I
Yeah.
think it helps us.
I mean, Elliot's point about pushback is valid,
Yeah.
although there is a path for changes to normative resources. The bar is just very high. Now, fortunately, adding elements is less breaking than some other changes that we wish we could make in normative elements.
Yeah, that's true.
That's not why I put my hand up a while ago. I put my hand up because, to clarify, R5 is out. We're not
Yeah.
changing R5 anymore. Right? The changes we're talking about would be R6.
Yeah.
Now, we can still pre-adopt, whether it's R5 or R6. There was a slide earlier that said what quarter, Elliot?
Quarter two,
Probably
Monday,
42, which
Q2?
day?
Q2 Monday.
Okay. That'll let them find the attendance log easier.
So,
Okay, sorry. Let me finish my thought.
okay,
So we talked about separating relationship and role and potentially adding an extension. My view is if the patient admin group is sort of going the same way in terms of separating the concepts, that we should be heading that direction too. Whether exactly how we model it, whether we create our own extension until they get things sorted out, or whether we pre-adopt an extension. The thing I'm concerned about is it may take a while to get the new element defined for R6, because it's just a lead time for all of this stuff, right? In terms of getting changes in and implemented. And I don't know when PA thinks they were going to have this set up for potential pre-adoption in R6. So I think we should align with the direction PA is going, and I agree with the separation of the concepts.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because like we could, if we don't do this right, we could write in, oh, it should be modeled this way, right? And it could change based on what PA is. But like, are folks more comfortable with model in the direction that patient administration is moving towards? And you know, whether that be something that needs to be defined as an extension or is a pre-adoption, but to leave it open and rather allow for that choice to be made, and follow through on what that choice is.
Personally, I really like this, the idea of us modeling it, rather than just mentioning it. And if we model an extension, that's tangible. And, you know, we can also we can wrap our use cases around it. And I think that could be helpful to everybody.
So Ron, and I pulled up the feedback Excel file, Elliot, if you're comfortable capturing. So what you're saying is it that in addition to moving towards a patient administration?
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So it's like
absolutely.
a two-part.
It's two-part thing. So move towards where they're going, but at the same time, model the extension. And let's see, you know, because that gives us something tangible to talk about.
If we're going to do that, I think we should make it clear that once PA has made the changes, that we will deprecate our extension and pre-adopt the international version.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we're not doing in spite of, you know, what we're doing is we're trying to move forward, and in the process of modeling the extension, you get clarity around what you're trying to do and achieve in terms of how it'll happen, which is informative in and of itself. And then, you know, if also there's still a problem with patient admin, even getting that extension to the resource, well, we've already done some work and we can build upon that and get going, right? So it covers us both ways, but we just have to recognize that moment when we make you know, what's the criteria to make that decision. But I think it's probably a better way to go.
Do folks feel that before recognizing any motions, that we need more discussion on this. Piers, I saw you go on off mute.
Yeah, no, I think that made everything quite clear, the discussion just now.
Ron, do you want to pose that as a motion? Like, how would you describe it? Also, will help Elliot in scribing, and then we can go through the process
Yeah,
that we
okay,
described last time.
I'll attempt to do that. So, I move that we work with or follow patient admin's exercises in terms of what they're, and I can't describe that exactly, but you'll be able to do that. Yeah, there you go. Okay, so in addition
I was just gonna see
to,
if
yeah.
I could help with your phrasing.
Sure.
So, so we intend to model the advancements made in PA for R6 in terms of separating the concepts of relationship and role, and intend to be consistent with the direction of the PA changes for R6. Is that what you're saying?
Well, that would be my ideal outcome. Yeah. The separation of concerns between the two, that's the big thing that I'm looking for. The issue is that the way you've just framed that, is that actually patient admin's approach? I missed that.
Well, that's what their jury ticket says based on.
Okay, perfect. That's fine. So if that's the case, I think we just align with their solution. But then I don't know if we need a second motion for the decision to nevertheless to proceed with modeling the extension.
So I don't mind saying that we align with their solution.
Yeah.
I think if they cannot go ahead with it,
Right.
I would much rather stay with the approach that is currently documented and that aligns with the current patient resource and its usage, than go out on a different direction and come up with our own extensions. I think the approach we have previously, I thought the approach we had of a single element where you can have multiple codable concepts on that relationship to describe the multiple different ways that someone can be a contact. I thought that was sufficient. So if they do not go ahead and separate the two concepts, I don't think we should go ahead and separate the two concepts.
Yeah, thumbs up in the chat from someone, but I don't know who.
Yeah, I understand entirely what you're saying, Elliot. There's an obstinate part of me that just really, like, I'm a modeler and I know how this should be modeled, and combining those two things into a single element makes me crazy. I just struggle with it. But having said that, here's my concern. My concern is that as a modeler, that will solve for one or two or a range of use cases, but it's not going to be flexible into the future. That's all. But if I can't make that business case right now, then, and I don't know if I could do that without some support. So I think, what you're basically saying, Elliot, is that we're either way. If patient admin succeeds, great. If they don't, we still adhere to the way that it ends up being modeled in R6. If we can still work with that, I mean, if that works for us for this. I think that's what you're saying. So no modeling of an extension.
Correct.
But relying upon the outcome of their work. Okay, so here's what I would prefer. I would like us in this motion to indicate that we will not just monitor that discussion, but we will actively participate in that discussion.
Well, okay, so to be fair, Ron, the context of this, we should be clear on who's we.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
like the context of this is feedback being submitted on the CA baseline to the CA core. So when you say we,
Okay.
are we
Okay,
saying
gotcha.
we're agreeing and motioning as we the CA baseline, or members of CA core and Kai-Hi? Like, we have to be more specific.
Okay, I haven't even thought that through, so. By
Well,
definition, go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say that, coming up with a solution which works with existing resource as it exists, as Elliot points out, and directions around that. And then noting that there's change coming and we will adapt to the change when it comes. Is that not sufficient? I mean, that's probably true about everything we're modeling. There's changes in all sorts of things from
Yeah.
R4 through R5 and R6,
That's true.
right?
I see, Christine, you had raised a hand. You might be on mute. Christine? Still on mute. Maybe it's a unintentional hand raise. All right, we'll come back to Christine. So Lorraine, what you're asking for is like, is what's described still reasonable, even if we're not in agreement on any additional things to add to it at this point, right?
Oh, I'm unmuted now, but
Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
I couldn't seem to unmute myself. I'm sorry about that. I wonder if this is helpful or not, but just for folks on a baseline that are not attending the data architecture, so the data architecture work that we're doing on the data standard. What I wanted to kind of emphasize here is we're in terms of the data modeling component and the changes that are happening through data to the data standards as we're doing that modeling with our group. Our intention at this time is not to have balloting on the data content standard. So there is a bit of
Yeah.
a few things that are happening. And I think the comment that had come up was about, well, what if there are changes that are occurring, then how would we deal with that? So I just kind of want to make sure that I just wanted to emphasize that on the Kai-Hi side of things, we're really working towards ensuring that we have the right content in terms of how we're modeling the actual data, but not specific to the data exchange or to technology specific types of applications. So
Yeah.
there is a bit of a distinction in what we're doing, but it's because we're early days, so we're not really ready to say that this is an approved content component. And I just didn't know if that would help with some of the clarity in the questions that you're having. Ron, you were about to say something. You're welcome to chime in.
Yeah, no, so the challenge, there's a tension there, a positive tension, I would add, between the modeling, which is meant to be definitional and without and unconstrained by any particular implementation. It's essentially saying this is how you would model this in the real world to make this really work. And then there's an alignment that has to occur between the definition and how it can actually be modeled and how that will impact. And this is the thing I was humming and hawing over. I mean, this sounds like something that would affect the baseline as well, right? In terms of, yeah. So I think all we can speak to at this moment in time, Christine, is that the conversations we're having here are around things that we know are already underway on the fire side of things while we are doing and clarifying definitions. And we have to proceed in terms of moving forward with this stuff. So we'll do the best we can with what we've got there. And then regardless, when we get to that moment, we have to make decisions around how the concepts, whether what we've done is actually will meet a particular need or not. I'm not expecting there to be too many heavy collisions there, but at the same time, we've got this overlap between the two tracks of work. And the other problem, of course, I think that we're having around the data modeling part is that while we have constructs for balloting on HL7 artifacts, there's no mechanism defined as yet for how to express authority in terms of the definitions that CIHI is doing. And we're sort of I mean, so the benefit to HL7 Canada is HL7 Canada has the capability to govern itself in terms of things related to HL7 standards. What we don't have is the governance coverage, if you will, around how we can authoritatively assert things about definitions. And that's creating a little bit of a problem.
Lorraine, I see that
Well,
you've got a
So
hand
I
up.
was just kind of
Yes.
hoping that that was helpful, though, if that helped
No,
clarify.
yeah, I think it's important to note for sure. And yeah,
So
Lorraine,
the other point I was going to make is that right now the CA4 Plus, as it exists, isn't even talking about cardinality yet. It's just talking about the concepts so far. And right now the data modeling is saying we have two concepts. Right now, in terms of the fire mapping, we're discussing whether we provide two repetitions of the codable concept or a specific extension. But that's that exact modeling mapping, I expect will need to be revisited and changed when CA Core Plus actually gets to the point where it's applying cardinality and optionality, those kinds of things. So right now we're saying we've got two concepts. How we actually represent them in fire is what we're discussing. But we're also noting that patient admin is recognizing that there are two concepts. So coming up with a practical mapping for now, and I'm quite comfortable with Elliot's solution of two codable concepts. And I
Yeah.
can also live with an extension for one of the concepts. To me, it actually doesn't matter that much. Although a non-extension solution is a little bit more straightforward for implementation. But we're trying to take what's still a pure conceptual modeling piece in the data modeling without some of the data modeling details that you're going to do in a later pass and get them down to the concrete fire representations. I think that's where we're
yes, correct.
running into challenges.
Yeah.
so Lorraine, are you saying you're comfortable with what Ella's expressed? I think it refreshed a second ago, like on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anyone who wants to make a motion towards, like, this is a piece of feedback we're comfortable providing?
I'm reading, hang on. Express is spelled wrong.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like it too.
Is that a first and a seconder?
Yeah.
I think Ron deserves first.
Okay, I'll move. And
Yeah.
someone can.
Is there anyone that would want to abstain? Is there anyone that feels like negative, who don't agree with that? This should be the piece of feedback we should provide. All right, that's, I think, 14. Perfect. Okay. There is one other thing that I want to see if folks are interested in talking about for patient. So we've talked about emergency contact relationship, and we're basically at the very end of what is in the mapping. So we're here. We already talked about patient notes earlier, so we've got some, like, I think it's like comments 3, 4 around that.
Oh, by the way, Joni's feedback on notes was approved. A notes extension.
Oh, awesome. In the working group meeting, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So what that leaves us with is concepts around most responsible provider. And so the reason I thought, and especially if we're asking for extension, it might make sense for us to talk through this. But I think it's an important distinction to kind of air out and see how we feel about said modeling. The idea is that there is kind of a set of most responsible provider information that's been defined at the person-patient level or at the patient level. And, you know, some of that is content that we're kind of used to seeing. Some of it might be content that might be closer to what might be more conveyed around other resources that is around the actual kind of process of the patient in a roster. The way that it's been modeled preemptively is that things like most responsible first name and last name might be transversable with the modeling against this general practitioner. And then these are elements within general practitioner. So if we look at the patient resource real quick, we've got this guy. So the idea being that some of these elements would map nicely to general practitioner and to either, you know, a practitioner role or practitioner, but some of them may not have an exact fit. So the ones I kind of identified as, you know, doesn't have a mapping right now against something discretely in the patient resource is enrollment status, enrollment start date, termination reason. The note that I provided is it's likely that it would be housed beyond the reference to an individual practitioner or a practitioner performing a role beyond those two resources, and might be more likely to be communicated in care team or through some other means. How do folks feel about that? Do they feel like that's a safe assumption? Do they feel like it's something that you'd more likely to see as something that's extending this concept of general practitioner? I see, Lorraine, you've got your hand up.
Okay, we've been having this discussion in DC as well, depending upon what direction you're coming to the problem from. So from the registry's point of view, for many of these things, and part of it is part of the restrictions of our legacy systems of what we want to touch and what we want to build something on top of. That from the longer term registry's point of view, the care team makes sense because it's very patient centric. From the patient attachment point of view, they're looking at coming at it from the practitioner role primarily, because that's where you know that they're actually giving service. And lists and or groups, and there's debates on what the most appropriate resource is in general. So the attachment project is really looking at providing a collection of patients that's associated with that practitioner role in either a roster or panel relationship, and their differences and different jurisdictions apply that. Is it more about billing or more about patient care perspective a little bit differently? So it's certainly, at least in the conversations I've been in, an ongoing topic about how that's actually should be modeled in FHIR. So I think you're sort of right in that it's that general direction. Now, I haven't looked to see whether the patient.primary care physician has any additional attributes like period on it that would deal with your dates.
I think it's a reference.
No,
it's just a reference to provider. Yeah.
or organization.
Or organization. Is it also a reference to practitioner role?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Because practitioner role is the sort of natural attachment point, although the name and stuff comes out of practitioner anyway by reference to practitioner role. So, but some of this comes down to whether you're looking at the problem from tracking the care providers for a given patient, and you're looking at it from a patient-centric sort of query, or whether you're looking at it from the view of the provider who's giving services and who's on the list of patients they're caring for, and are they rostered or paneled, because there's a difference. So I think it's, my sense is, and I've only been, like BC met with Alberta to talk about how they were doing it. I've only been in some conversations, but I think it's still unsettled solutions. People are still talking about what the best approach to this is.
In
You could
terms of
also do
where the
episode
details
of-
go.
Yeah.
Elliot, you
You
were
could
saying?
also do episode of care. And for the entire period that they are associated with some organization, that's an episode of care.
Yeah, depending upon,
Or rather
How-
encounter.
well, depending on how you deal with the encounter in an ambulatory setting, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
Because there's variations on that as well. So there's a bunch of solutions being discussed. Nothing's been settled on, as far as I can see, even in the specific projects that I've been associated with.
So what would be our recommendation then from into the CA Core channel for how the CA Core should address this? Like in terms of in the context of there's a bunch of solutions that are out there. There's pros and cons of each being evaluated. You know, the next time that we look at refining these concepts, should we do anything more than just continue to identify that it's not on patient? At least we all agree on that. Or are we recommending that we go further?
Most of these elements you've got here are more about the relationship between a patient and a provider. So of course, one of the things that's challenging in FHIR is dealing with relationship attributes when there's not an explicit relationship entity to talk about. Although provider role gives you the relationship between the provider and an organization and a work location, but it doesn't actually explicitly give you a relationship with the patient.
No.
Care team's closer to that. And so far the registries team with BC is sort of leaning towards care team as the longer term solution, but there's business things around that mean that discussion is very much still up in the air. But we
do you
are
think the
talking
EG
about
should be
relationships.
expanded?
Which should be expanded?
So like right now, there's just one EG. Do you think that this should be expanded to reflect what might be out there already for what's being discussed in solutions, or to keep it kind of as it is as a singular example?
Ooh. Do we even want to go into the examples?
That's another way that we could provide feedback to say, you know, remove an example for now. Where are folks leaning? So the
It's
kind
just-
of options discussed is keep as is with the examples, add to the examples to reflect that there's a lot of discussion that's happening and maybe more than one is appropriate, or remove the examples entirely.
Yeah, this is a good segue into practitioner discussion around practitioner role as well. So, I would like to hear from others about the example piece because they're coming from two totally different perspectives. One is patient-centric and one is provider-centric viewpoint.
So Lorraine, are you saying you'd like more information before providing feedback?
Oh,
Like-
I'd like more feedback from the group about the whole question around examples.
Yeah, on this group.
Yeah.
Any immediate feelings towards it? I'm asking with 1 or 2 minutes of the hour left. My hope was that we could start on practitioner next session, but we can return to this and say, hey, we discussed the last session, modifying this, given some of this context, how do we want to move forward? Elliot, I saw you went off mute.
Did I?
Oh,
Okay, I'm wondering if it helps the discussion to say, rather than expect it to be housed outside of patient resource, which is true, I agree with that. It's the modeling of the relationship attributes or relationship concepts between patients and practitioners is not yet clarified or something like that. I don't know if that helps at all.
Do we want to try for, are folks comfortable with that? Or do we want to have more discussion on it next session? Randy, I saw you go off mute.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, some of those seem to me that kind of does belong with the patient, like, because if you move this out entirely with the panel, then does that mean everybody in the panel has the same most responsible provider? Right? Because that's kind of like, for this patient, this is who's the provider for it. On the other hand, like you say, this stuff it's attached to the practitioner. It's not the patient related stuff, other than the designation of the most responsible person or provider. And I don't know, some of that partly
Maybe
would be
some
outside this
discussion
thing,
still
but part
needed.
would be it. Yeah. Well, it depends
think
on
more
the context of this, right?
Yeah. I mean, from a data modeling perspective, we're talking about attributes on an associative entity, right? How one thing relates to another, but that doesn't map to fire very well.
So given that we're 1 minute over, what I'm going to say is maybe this is one thing that we can try to keep, you know, as a small portion of our next session to say, you know, is there a piece of feedback that we can narrow in on that focuses on what we feel comfortable saying versus not having to model everything out? So we can return to what that language might be that we'd recommend in the first session next time. Does that make sense for folks? Because I definitely don't think we could get to the bottom of the modeling in the next minute or two. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing and I will post the recording of the session shortly. But we are nearly there, the biggest resource that exists. So, thank you, folks. Thanks for the work through both of these items today, and I'm excited to talk about practitioner next time. Have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks, Sheridan.
Thanks,
Thanks,
folks.
you
Thanks,
guys.
thanks,
Cheers.
everyone.